Chalk Talk is brought to you by Isolite, the emergency lighting experts. Stay educated, my friends.
February 26th, 1935, radar was first demonstrated by Robert Watson Watt. And much like radar helps identify potential challengers and keep your distance between them, our last two Chalk Talks, we focused on the launch of brand new products to keep on your radar and help us keep our distance from our competitors. Very sorry for the dad joke, but I could not help myself. Hello, everybody. I'm Matt Bird, Eastern Regional Manager, along with Greg Keel, our Western Regional Sales Manager. As always, Evan Ackman, who heads up our product development team, will be running with the Chalk Talk today. And as I mentioned, back-to-back months of new product announcements, which is super exciting for us. Today, we're focusing on a brand new micro inverter, which is excellent. And at the end of all of this, there's going to be a QR code to potentially win a trip around the world, which is also very exciting. So thanks, everybody, again, for being on here. And Evan, go ahead and take it away, sir.
Yeah, the trip around the world is one of the potential prizes. I think that we should make that very clear, that it's not a guarantee that the prize will be a trip around the world. It could be something exotic such as that, or maybe something slightly less exotic. Also, related to the dad joke there, Matt, we're not even going to talk about the fact that the guy's name is Watson Watt. Like, what is that all about? Anyway, thank you for the nice intro, and thank you all for being here on a very strange Monday Chalk Talk. We're actually traveling tomorrow, so we had to move the date. And as Matt said, we're going to be talking about micro inverters here today, and particularly about our new E3U. But before we get into the details of that product, I really want to just touch very quickly on the architecture of sort of LED drivers or emergency LED drivers and small inverter-based systems, and talk about some of the trade-offs. And we talk a lot about sort of moving from emergency LED drivers to inverters, but this is going to be a little bit of a different spin on it. So this is new material for you guys. Then we'll jump over to the details of the product. We'll talk about putting chocolate in peanut butter or peanut butter within chocolate. That's really what we've got here with this micro inverter as a part of our E3 series. We'll talk about what that product looks like, how it wires, and everything about it. We'll then end with a little bit of a discussion on the inverter lineup. We have a lot of different products in the family now. We'll talk about how they all fit together and whether things are going to be discontinued or what's going to happen with some overlaps we have. Talk about the release information. Then, as Matt said, the last slide is going to have a QR code. So get your phones ready when we get there. Make sure that you take a little picture of that so that you can go to the SurveyMonkey, put your name in so that you're entered into the contest for one of those fabulous prizes. Now, as I said, we're going to start by talking about architecture, and this is kind of the architecture that we're dealing with right here. We've got a very simplified drawing, sort of a logical drawing of 9 fixtures with a lighting control on it. And we want to make some of those fixtures emergency fixtures. So, one way to do this would be with a traditional emergency LED driver, and this has some ramifications on the wiring. We'll ignore right now some of the things that you're going to have to do in order to make that LED driver go into that fixture. That can be kind of painful, but we'll talk about that when we talk about the trade-offs. The other thing that you have to do when you've got these emergency drivers, though, just to draw your attention to it, is you've got to bring an unswitched utility power up to it. That's really how the driver knows one, what the status of the system is, and then that's also how it charges. So you need to be sort of constantly charging. It needs to have access to the uncontrolled AC power. Not a huge deal generally. It doesn't have to go in separate conduits or anything. There's not a lot of rules and regulations that make that complicated. And, we often spend a lot of time talking about the inverter architecture, but in this instance, for a small system, there are a couple additional wires that we're going to have to deal with here. And so, first and foremost, we've got to bring that lighting controls output back to the input of the E3 Mini as it's drawn here. And then we have to drag an emergency circuit out to those emergency fixtures. Now, I would contend that this still makes sense cost-wise, even though this wire, this emergency normally on output from the inverter, isn't that big of a deal. There may be a perceived difference there that sort of isn't the best. But in terms of the trade-offs that you're dealing with, the emergency driver is nice because it can be mounted inside the fixture. It doesn't really require that isolated emergency circuit. Again, the cost of that may be perceived to be higher than it actually is. The other thing it doesn't need is any additional hardware. Now, I also digress. Our E3 Mini in this example wouldn't need additional hardware either. But if you were talking about a large, big centralized inverter, you would need emergency lighting control devices out there to make sure that you are actually, making the lights operate in a code compliant way. The downsides of the emergency drivers have been covered really in a very exhaustive way throughout the last 5 years of Chalk Talks. But they have limitations in terms of their compatibility. They only work with LED light sources. You don't get full light output. They don't have a lot of flexibility. They're batteries everywhere solution, so you're going to have to deal with the maintenance of it. Compliance and fit and finish. They're just sort of complicated devices. And that really also takes into account the fact that you sort of have to get to the inside of the fixture in order to make it operate properly. The emergency driver sits sort of between the traditional AC architectural driver and the LED engine. So if you're going to field wire them, you sort of have to get into that fixture, kind of cut the wires in the middle like you were disarming a bomb, and then wire that emergency driver into the middle. Now, the trade-offs with the inverter, it solves some of those problems, right? It centralizes the testing and monitoring. You get those economies of scale, which really lowers the cost of the job. It's compatible with all load types because it just makes AC power. That includes non-lighting loads like exit signs, exhaust fans sometimes. And the fixtures wire perfectly as usual. There's nothing special about the fixtures. That said, the downsides are kind of the inverse of the emergency driver. One, it's going to require that dedicated emergency circuit. Because it doesn't go inside the fixture or up near the fixture, you're going to need some wall or floor space for the installation. Again, it's not huge, but it is something that's a little bit different. And then there's that additional run for the control signal. You have to have the output of the lighting control going back to the input of the mini inverter so that so that the inverter knows how to actually drive the lights in that instance. Now, bringing these two things together is going to start to solve some of these problems for us. We get to start cherry picking some of the benefits and start axing off some of those downsides. So a micro inverter, like you see as our E3U down there in the bottom right, it's going to be small, like an emergency driver, but it's not intended to go inside the fixture. It can go in the fixture, but it really wants to go on the back of the fixture or near the fixture. That's an attribute because it doesn't actually have to get direct access to the LED light engine. It's going to be out in front like an inverter would be because it just makes AC power out of it. This drastically simplifies the on-site wiring. It makes it more like the traditional emergency driver installation. It's inexpensive. It's going to drive that cost down in the same way that an emergency driver does. Not all the way to what like a large inverter would do because you're not getting the economy of scale. And just to be frank, it doesn't solve some of those maintenance problems in terms of the fact that you've got batteries all over the place. They still have obligations for testing, but we'll talk about that here in a couple slides. So if we go back and look at the sort of that pro and con list that we had 2 slides ago, this is what I'm calling the chocolate in my peanut butter effect. So we basically get to remove some of those compatibility and inflexibilities that are associated with emergency drivers while keeping most of their advantages. Similarly, on the inverter side, we lose the ability to have that centralized testing and monitoring. We lose a little bit of the economy of scale, although we do still keep up some of it with our 100-watt version of this product. And we pick up that cool facet of being compatible with any load type. So it's not just very traditional LED loads with very particularly matched emergency drivers to it. And, as I said before, this thing wires exactly like an inverter. So there's a lot of benefits to that. Now, in terms of the product line, we really have 2 variants of the E3U, and the U is there to really mean micro, like the Greek symbol mu, but that's really hard to type. So we just called it the E3U, but really that means E3 micro. Anyway, we have 36 and 100-watt variants. All of the products will come with 0 to 10 volt dimming. It's not an option. It comes standard with every product, and it has a very high pass-through ratio. So 10 to 1 on the 36 watts, you can get 360 watts of pass-through. So 9 to 1 on the 100-watt variant, so you get 900 watts of pass-through. The 0 to 10 volt dimming is going to just pass through the control signal when normal power is available. When there's an emergency, it's going to regulate the output to be in line with what the battery capacity is. So it'll dim down that 360 watt fixture all the way so that it's within the 36 watts. Similar, it's going to take that 900 watt fixture, that's a pretty big fixture, down to 100 watts, such that the fixture and the micro inverter will be compatible. Self-diagnostics is standard on all units. Again, you don't have to order a special version. This sort of matches what we've done with our emergency driver lineup. Although we know that self-diagnostics can sometimes be a liability on emergency lights because it would mean that the lights would light up when they were intended to be off at some points in time. So if that's not something that's to your advantage, there is a defeat switch on the unit. There's a little button, and through some button calisthenics, you can actually tap it a couple times and it will disable that self-diagnostics and go back to a full manual test regime. It's universal, so it works with 120 and 277 systems. It'll automatically detect at startup. There's no dip switches or buttons or anything you have to do. It knows how to determine what the incoming line voltage is, and it'll automatically make the output match it. And then we also have a little bit of a unique battery chemistry as compared to our competitors. We've opted to not go with a more traditional like nickel metal hydride or NiCad battery. This will allow us to get smaller and lighter and get a little bit longer life out of the product. We've used a lithium cobalt construction, which is a very high density and very safe construction for a battery. So, again, just trying to build a better mousetrap all over the place. And while it's certainly not limited to one fixture, our idea is that really the E3U is going to be useful with 1, 2, maybe 3 fixtures, especially when you get to that 100 watt. 100 watts a lot of inverter power, and the fact that this thing is small and can be just basically zip tied to the deck, you could put these things out exactly where it needs to be. I put this slide in here really so that if you went and looked through the slides after the fact, you'd have a wiring diagram. But suffice to say, it wires exactly like an inverter would. If you've seen my chalk talks on inverters, basically it's the exact same thing. Now, as you may recognize, we've talked a lot about inverters over the last couple months. We've recently extended the line on the E3 Mini. Last year, we came out with both the E3X and E3 Max. This year, we actually intend to add more products to the lineup. And if you look at this product lineup, basically our E3U takes us down to that 36 watt mark, and the E3 Max takes us up all the way to 33,000 VA on the inverter. So we've got basically every size covered. There is a little bit of overlap though, and I've drawn the MPS down there kind of sitting off by itself very intentionally. We think that the E3U is going to be used really in every application where the MPS was used before. We actually sent out the price book last month with the E3U pricing in there. You'll see that it's a little bit less expensive than the MPS. It's a very cost-effective kind of device. And so it's smaller than the MPS. It's got a little bit more of a modern battery just because it's a newer product. So we believe that the MPS is going to atrophy down to nothing, but we're not going to artificially discontinue it prior to that. I think probably in the next 12 to 18 months, we'll remove it from the lineup, but we know that there are existing specs written. There's a little bit of a difference in terms of the feature set and sizing available between the E3U and the MPS. So it'll stick around at least for a little while. So nothing is going away just yet. The E3U, I'm excited to announce, is going to be available April 1st. As I mentioned, we've already sent out the pricing for this with the price book that we released a few weeks ago. So that's very exciting. The E3U 100 is probably just a couple days behind that. But generally speaking, if you put in an order on April 1st, the standard lead times will apply. So that's very exciting for us. And as always, the spec sheets and the website and all the marketing assets are available on the web right now, or at least they will be within the next hour or so. And as a follow-up to this presentation, we're going to send out a link to me giving the presentation, the slides themselves, so that if you want to give the presentation, you can do that. All of the assets that we've created between now and when the follow-up goes out, as well as the announcement of the raffle winner. And that right there on the right-hand side, right above Lumi, is the raffle. So now is the time where you should get out your phone, get the camera out and take a picture of that so that you can enter the raffle. I'll very quickly just put our mug shots up here. So as always, I'm Evan. Greg and Matt are on the line. We certainly appreciate you guys and all that you do for us. So if there's anything that we can do to support you, please do not hesitate to reach out. You have our contact information. We love hearing from you guys and working with you. So please don't hesitate. We love helping. If there are any questions, I will certainly stick around and answer them now while I keep the raffle link open. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of February, and we'll see you just before Easter.